You didn't give me any blue in the background. I mean, orange. It's blue.
Oh yeah. I left the blue gels on behind me.
I'm only kidding.
Hey, there we go. Now we're live. Hey, everybody, we have 57 watching. Let's see where everybody is viewing this from. We have first one's Jackie in South Carolina. We have Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Scott from Arkansas. Hey, we have somebody from Greece. There you go.
Nice.
New York, Florida, and Kentucky so far. So we are a few minutes early, but we decided to just join everybody, and you'll notice Joshua is not in his home. He's or just tell everybody that's your home. It's a really nice spare bedroom, right?
Yeah, right. But yeah, I'm traveling on the road, man. I'm venturing out to the different Bedford camera stores, so I'm just on a halfway point in between my travels, and I'm just doing this live from the Fairfield Inn and Suites in Arkansas.
Well, there you go. It was a restful night's sleep.
Right.
And you will be in, we'll make this announcement again later. You will be in Oklahoma City tomorrow, right?
That's right. Yeah, open to pretty much open to mid-afternoon. I'd say, I stayed yesterday till about 4 o'clock. So if you are local to the Oklahoma City area, come find me at Bedford Camera.
Yeah. I assume you have an Alpha 1 with you and maybe an A7R or A7 IV, possibly.
Right. Oh yeah,
Wonderful.
A7 IV, Alpha 1, 70 to 200 GM2. I pretty much have it all with me.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, 50 megapixels. That was well, I thought the A7R4 was ridiculous. I mean, 60 megapixels, 61 megapixels. I mean, that was incredible.
Yeah, I mean, where will it end? The megapixel race, I believe, is pretty much null and void at this point. It's more of about how clean can we get these images, ISO performance, low light performance. Lens technology has definitely been another kind of thing, idea as well. It's just more than megapixels, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and even in some of the classes I teach, I've talked not only about resolution and how helpful that can be, but that resolution is only useful if you focus properly. If you're using the focus tools correctly, not just manual focus, but using the face tracking and subject tracking modes on these newer cameras. So know those tools. I mean, I feel like that's just important as getting the exposure correct.
That's
right.
Right.
Chris?
Good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. How's everybody doing?
Everybody's doing well. We have 69 watching on YouTube so far.
Excellent.
Chris, do you need the link to YouTube?
No, we're good.
Okay, excellent. We have more. Oh, we have Las Vegas. We have Hawaii. Somebody from Honolulu watching.
Nice.
We have Manchester, England, Vancouver, Canada, not Washington. I'm sure somebody from Vancouver, Washington's watching. We have Florida, Virginia. Yeah, quite a few. Austin, there you go.
Hey, that's my old stomping grounds.
That's it. Eileen's from Los Angeles. Very cool. We're going to get started here in about a minute, 2 minutes or so. So get set up. Hey, somebody from Sri Lanka, somebody from Toronto. So they're jumping on, which is awesome. So we have 69 watching so far. I know we're going to have more coming on. So we'll give you guys a little bit more time to jump in. Feel free to take notes. Joshua's going to have some awesome a notebook full of notes for you to take today. No pressure, Joshua.
No pressure at all. Like I said last time, you're the only one I see on the other side. So I pretend like I'm just talking to you.
Exactly. So yeah, we're going to make this announcement here in a few minutes, but Joshua is basically on a tour, like a Bedford tour. So he's going to be in Oklahoma City. So if you happen to be near the Oklahoma City area and you want to see Joshua just in person, then you have that opportunity. But he is going to have an Alpha 1, an A7 IV, quite a few lenses, I'm sure. Just cases of lenses with him. It feels like that sometimes, right?
Oh man, you have no idea. It's a responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes, absolutely. So it's right at 10 o'clock. I'll go ahead and start with my announcements, and then I will introduce Joshua, and then you can give whatever announcements you want to before you start. So my name is Tyler with Bedford Camera and Video. We're so glad to have you for this landscape class. And again, get something to drink, get your notepad ready. This is going to be on YouTube. This is being live streamed right now on YouTube, but it will be available for playback pretty much as soon as we end the stream. So you'll be able to watch this again, fill in any kind of notes that you have. And so let's see, there's a special trade-in bonus this week. So if there's some gear you want to move from over to Sony, now is a great time to do it. So bring your gear. We're doing a special trade-up deal this week. So bring your gear into any of our physical locations. We'd be glad to help you out with that, as well as we have a trade-in form on our website at bedfords.com. A lot of really cool things going on in terms of instant rebates on lenses and bodies. We have a lot of A7 III cameras, bodies and kits, and there's a cool bundle with that. So check the website out, check your local Bedford store for those awesome deals. And also it is, I'm just making sure I'm going through my notes here. So Bedford is covering the sales tax on the Sony and Pros. So if you use Bedford tax at the transaction website, and then if you go into a physical store, the associates would be glad to help you out with that. Just make sure you're aware of those awesome deals. And again, want to point out, if you're in the Oklahoma City market, Joshua's going to be there tomorrow. So from 10 to probably about 4 or so. So come check it out. He has lots of answers to your questions. So Joshua, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it over from here.
Great, Tyler. Thank you so much. I'm going to also just put out maybe if there's any kind of glitching in the video or whatever. I'm only working off the hotel Wi-Fi, so let's hope that no interruptions happen here. But I will actually stop my video to kind of help with that bandwidth a little bit. Also, I wanted to mention that before we get started, you talk about some of the promotions. We also have the Buy More, Save More to consider the rest of this month into the new year. But basically buy 2 or more lenses and you can receive an additional Sony rebate up to $200 per lens. We kind of talked about this a little bit in the last webinar, but as far as being able to access that promo, remember alphauniverse.com/lens promo to find more information about claiming that rebate, which is done after the time of purchase. So that would be sent to you from Sony. But as far as travel photography is concerned, if you haven't joined me before, my name is Joshua Needham. I am a Sony Alpha imaging specialist. Basically, I'm working with Bedford Camera, the many different Bedford Camera locations, providing a lot of training to the staff and also on the customer end, being able to bring products into the store that aren't readily available, so we can kind of get our hands on that, especially when we talk about new cameras like the A7 IV, A7 Alpha 1, 70 to 200 GM2. I mean, I have it all with me. So please, again, I'll be there in Oklahoma City tomorrow if you are local. And so, when we talk about what travel photography is. Travel talk for me. Travel is one of the photographic genres that's a bit kind of trickier to define. Part of the reason why is that it actually kind of encompasses a lot of other genres of photography within it. Travel photography can mean very different things to different people. Some like to travel as more of a relaxation experience. Some like to experience new cultures. Some like to see nature in other places. And because of all of those variations, the best way to look at travel photography is through the concept of storytelling, kind of transporting the viewer somewhere else. And the idea here is that we want to make that viewer feel like they've been magically transported to that new location through the story told in your photographs. And again, a lot of genres in there, right? It can be your landscapes, your cityscapes. You can definitely focus on architectural. Many different areas have different, architecture that they implement. Then you have your traditional street photography, as well as if you're out there in nature, you can definitely play a little bit there. And then, when you're traveling, you're also eating. So you can definitely encompass some food photography in there as well, which we'll all kind of go into. And one of the best ways to better yourself in any type of photography is to actually immerse yourself in the works of others. Here are a few of travel photographers from the Alpha Imaging Collective for you to check out. So we have Autumn Strock with landscape, nature, wildlife photography, along with the RT yoga selfies in the wild. We also have Mike Myers focusing on cityscapes and buildings. You have Lizzie specializing in artsy self-portraiture around the world. And you have Tiffany Nguyen, who is an adventure travel photographer herself. Just some examples of some images around while traveling. You have top left there, you see downtown Nashville. And we have the North Fork Reservoir near Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Bottom left, you have the sunset over Mount Fuji in Japan. And in New York City, which we can distinguish there from Central Park. So I'll be talking about, gear, my suggestions for when I'm traveling, what I'm doing before my trip, what I'm doing during my trip. And so here I'm going to go through, different photography genres we're going to experience when we're traveling, along with tips and tricks for different kinds of locations. And then we'll talk after your trip, where we'll actually, what do we do with these photos once you're back home? And then after that, we'll have, time to answer some questions. So we can get started by talking about, gear that you would want to bring with you while traveling. Here's a look inside my bag. What I'm bringing when I'm traveling in a nutshell. Like this one backpack can house all of these items. For the A7R4, definitely high resolution, full frame body is just always with me. Pair that with something like a 24 to 72.8 and the 100 to 400. I mean, that combo right there can get a lot done for you. Definitely carrying around a little prime lens with me. The 55-1.8 was the second lens I ever bought from Sony, and I've had it ever since. In the event I'm not going out with a full frame camera for that day, I at least have my RX100 with me, and I'll pair that with the little shooting grip for added ergonomic. And even now, that shooting grip has been wireless to work with all of the Alpha cameras. Definitely bring your SD cards, your Sony Tough cards if you can, for that splash proof, water resistant media. Bringing extra batteries, my Z100 batteries. I mean, 2 is definitely enough for me, but when we were talking about the W series batteries with some of the older models, we were definitely carrying a bit more. So I definitely pride those Z batteries a lot. And then I'll bring an L bracket, some added accessories there. Something like an L bracket helps for the tripod. Even being able to mount my camera vertically on a tripod without having to articulate the head over 90 degrees. And again, all of this is fitting inside of my Peak Design everyday bag. It's a 30-liter. So even that can carry, a lot more than just the camera equipment. You can basically stow some extra accessories up on top with all of your camera gear on the underneath. And so, some added things that I'm bringing with me is a power bank, because all of these cameras have the ability to charge via USB. So something like a power bank just gets me a few more charges when I don't have access to a wall. I'll bring my green pod with me as well. We'll talk about the green pod, but that is a very cool little beanbag-like accessory. Definitely go out with my bulb blower, my lens pen, just for cleaning off any kind of debris, or a quick cleaning on the sensor in between changing lenses. We have the multi-tool, because you should have one, and holding all my cards into a memory card holder. Now, I was talking about bringing the A7R4 with me, but I'm also going to bring out that A7C camera as of lately. The A7C is such a small, compact design, but boasting that full frame sensor. So, before the A7C camera, we were actually looking at APS-C models of that form factor, but now we can squeeze such a higher sensor size, an increased sensor size in virtually that same body. But with the A7C and the A7R4 kind of boasting the same type of autofocus, the same real-time tracking autofocus, really I can use both cameras very fluidly with each other, because they're pretty much the same menu system. Just one has an increased 61 megapixels, whereas the other one's a 24 megapixel. So one for my low light, and another more advantageous for low light, and the other basically capturing anything with an amazing crop ability. But even before the A7C camera, we have the A6400, A6600 cameras to consider as well, and even other APS-C cameras like the ZVE10 have made it even smaller ergonomic. The beauty between full frame and crop frame, and at least within the Sony ecosystem, is that it's all one mount, right? So I can use all of my Sony lenses, whether it is a full frame or a crop frame system. Now, my 16-35, my ultra wide, great for interiors or any kind of wide scene. My 24-105, I mean, that's become a main walk around lens as well. So if you're not, if you're not going out with, have a 24-72/8, or it doesn't need to be a 24-72/8, something like the 24-105 f4 is phenomenal, especially due to the fact that that lens is going to have OSS, or optical steady shot, built into the lens. So you can pair that with your IBIS, or your in-body image stabilization in the body, and you can have just an increased performance and stability alone, or handheld ability. My 100-400, I mean, that is definitely a long telephoto that I have with me. In that 55-1.8, I said it's the second lens I ever bought, and I hold it with me today. For the APS-C, now we can definitely utilize a smaller lens form factor when we are talking about APS-C cameras. So in relation, the 10-18 is an f4 lens, also with optical steady shot, but something like that paired on an APS-C camera is giving me an almost equivalent field of view as the full frame 16-35 would be. And then the 18-135 lends itself to be a kit lens, primarily with the 6000 series cameras. That's a great walk around as well. You just have, the equivalent of a 24 to almost a little over 200 millimeters in such a small, compact size. And, another lens that I love to talk about is the 70-350, because that's something I would use whether it is a full frame or it's designed for a crop frame, but if it is going on a full frame like my A7R4, for example, I'm actually achieving a 525 millimeter equivalent at 350 millimeters. And so, and still have, cropped resolution on an A7R4 is going to be something like 26 megapixels. So I still have more than enough resolution, but I'm not going out with, the 200 to 600, for example, to get that equivalent field of view in a much smaller footprint. And less, it's a less not distracting. It's I'm calling less attention to myself too. I don't have such a large, long white lens with me, but I have this relatively small telephoto. So, so many lenses, 65 lenses to choose from. So you can definitely find what works best for you. And even the 35-1.8, some of those APS-C prime lenses will have OSS, or that stabilization in the lens, something like this 35-1.8, and the even the 50-1.8 for the crop frame will have not only small form factor, 1.8 aperture, but also pairing that with stabilization in the lens. Looking at even smaller options compared to the ILCs or the interchangeable lens cameras, you have that RX100 series, basically a pocket ability to the idea of going out with one of these alpha cameras, because you're going to boast the same kind of technology. You're going to have the same almost identical menu system, and you're still able to shoot raw image quality with the RX100 series. And so we're up to a 24 to 200 millimeter on that zoom lens. Some other models of the RX100, previous models were a 24 to 70 millimeter. And then there's the RX10. Version 4, we're up to with a 24 to 600 millimeter, all in one. So you can't take the lens off of this, what we would kind of call a bridge camera. Basically, it is a literal bridge in between the interchangeable lens camera and something like a point and shoot, where both of these cameras are going to boast a 1-inch sensor. Again, being able to shoot raw image quality, but for that form factor, having a 600 millimeter, and that's going to be 600 millimeter at f4. So you start at 2.8 with the 24 millimeter, or actually you start at 2.5 with the RX10 Mark IV. It's a 2.5 to f4. So imagine just hand holding a 600 millimeter f4. And although we can hold a 600 millimeter f4 prime lens, the cost difference is very significant between the two. I talked about having the Peak Design backpack with me, but also there are definitely other bags worth considering. And again, yourself better, but a messenger bag is great for access, but it's bad for basically holding anything else that's not camera equipment. And that's why, what I was saying about being able to have your camera equipment and more options inside of the Peak Design backpack. And even, separated that from a traditional camera bag. It's easy for gear storage, but it's not a lot of space for anything else that's not camera gear. A rolling backpack, it's good for carrying around gear and saving your back or neck, because I'm definitely someone who has not the best back. I definitely have some neck issues in my life, but so I try to relieve a lot of that stress. Travel tripods have become increasingly light, easy to carry with you. Something like the Mi Photo was one of the first larger, one of the first large tripod investments I made. And that's not really saying much, except, when you're just fresh out of college and you go into a $300, $400, carbon fiber tripod, yeah, that's a big deal. Now though, even with the Peak Design travel tripod, this is what I'm using now. And again, you might think this is like a Peak Design commercial here, but the new design makes these legs fold up very small. It fits practically into any water bottle pocket of those camera bags I was talking about. So it's a very unique design in itself. And I talked about the Green Pod. This is a camera specific bean bag with a tripod point to attach the camera and strap to secure the lens. So to give you an idea of how that Green Pod works, this is a 15-second exposure shot with the A7R4. Now, the 5-axis stabilization in the camera is great, but it can't handle a 15-second exposure. And in this case, I didn't have a tripod on me. I was able to set up the camera on the railing there with the Green Pod to help stabilize it, which I wouldn't have been comfortable doing with just the camera. And so I was able to get this 15-second exposure, get a sharp, not blurry image. Now, kind of like a little downside to the Green Pod is that you don't want to have it on a surface that's not secure. And with that in mind, another alternative to tripods is the Platypod. It started as a Kickstarter, if you don't recall, but it's literally just a small metal plate that you attach a tripod head onto. It has some adjustable feet to deal with non-flat surfaces. So while the plate is pretty lightweight, takes up very little space, you would have to bring a tripod head with you though. And the benefit here is that you can use the straps to secure that Platypod to almost any surface, right? Railings, trees. I talked about spare batteries, about that Z100 battery has changed ever so much from the original W series batteries. And meaning that it's almost 3-to-1. Like one Z battery can practically replace 3 of the older W series batteries, which we were using in the crop frame cameras, as well as some of the beginning full frame A7 models. But now we pretty much adopted the Z series. The power bank, though, is aside from just charging my phone, I can charge my camera battery while on the go. So I can actually have my camera plugged into a power bank while shooting. Some cameras allow for charging and shooting. Others just allow for it to be charging. But that can all just be in your bag while charging. Filters. So we have, ND filters help a lot, especially when in cases like, waterfalls. I want to get running water and I want to create that nice blur, that nice, almost like a smooth look to that water. And then you have your polarizers to consider, right? Circular polarizers help make colors pop, and they're primarily there to help tame those reflections or cut down on some haze. And then you have your remotes, helps with group shots or just, if I'm doing any kind of selfie idea or longer exposures, setting the camera down and waiting to capture, a certain moment. So we also have rain covers to consider. I'm going out with an inexpensive rain cover just to, although these cameras are weather resistant, they're not waterproof, but definitely having some kind of protection will, the longevity of the camera. I'm organizing everything. I'm such an organized person that the cable organizer is such a nice little thing because I'm putting, more than just cables inside of that organizer that you see on the bottom right, which is the made from a brand called Cocoon. It's their gridded system. It's an accessory organizer, but it virtually just slips right into the bag. It's about 12 by 8, I think. Laptops can be very useful, even if you aren't going to post during your trip, as you can back up your images daily. And alternatively, you can bring an external hard drive with you with a memory card reader. And smartphones have been, such a great additional tool as well. I mean, when we talk about even Sony smartphones, the Xperia 1 series boast a lot of the same autofocus as you're seeing in our latest cameras like Alpha 9, right? But I primarily use the cell phone in tandem with the cameras for added benefits of imaging edge, transferring photos, or even using the cell phone as a remote through the app for the cameras. Now that you got all your gear squared up, let's talk about some things that you can do to improve your travel photography before your trip. We'll be talking about research, location scouting, Google Maps saved lists. If you're not familiar with that, we'll talk about seasons, weather, and timing for sunrise, sunsets, and some important decisions that should be kind of made before going on your trip. In many ways, the research you will do for travel photography for your trip will be similar to a regular vacation, right? There are many conventional resources that will help you, like guidebooks, from your AAA books, your trip advisors, or asking even concierge or locals. But we've got a few newer, sources that work especially well for photo travel. Now we have YouTube and travel vlogs to our avail, which is a great way to get in deep into the culture of many locations, right? Reddit has many travel sections along with special or specific regional sections where you can ask questions and get unique suggestions. And there are a few social media standouts worth considering, including Instagram, Flickr, and Pinterest. Now with Instagram, you can search for a place either by using a hashtag or its location. I like to go in here and see what people are posting. You will likely get a lot of results with people and not the actual places, but just keep scrolling and you'll find some potentially great stuff that you can use to inspire yourself. Flickr works out very well in this respect, as it's a network for primarily photographers. So you can find a location and see what folks have been photographing there to get some inspiration. And another social media site I suggest, it's not one that most people think of, but Pinterest. There is a lot of great travel content on Pinterest. A lot of it does point back to travel blogs and the like, but I find this to be a much more productive search than looking on Google, as it has a more visual nature to it. Plus, you can create specific Pinterest boards for each location that you want to travel to and share that with your travel partners. So with Google Maps save lists, this has become my best friend when it comes to travel planning. I still do travel research, documenting details, but being able to have spots that I want to visit that I can visually see on a map really helps me create an itinerary, as well as keep me supplied with options when I'm having a go with the flow kind of day. So here's your basic map you see when you log into Google Maps, but Maps has the ability to save any location to a list. The first kind is called starred places, and you can see the little star logo on each of these yellow pins. I use starred places to save places I have already been to and liked and feel are worth visiting again, maybe. This is useful for when you revisit a location. You have a reference for places you've already been to. The next kind of is called Want to Go, and it's basically a little green flag. I use these exactly as described. Here, I save any location I have not yet been to, but I want to check out. As I mentioned, you can use these to help your planning before the trip. I also use these when I'm out. A lot of my travel is pretty easygoing, and while I might have something scheduled, I like to wander and explore. That's part of how I find some of the great spots that I find. By having a map referenced like this, I can easily pull it up and see what's nearby and head to those spots. So in order to save an entry on Google Maps, first you click on the spot that you want to save. There will be a save icon next to the directions icon. So then we click on that and we'll see the lists that you can save to. There's another one here I didn't mention called favorites, which is, a red heart. And I'll use this for scenic viewpoints. So while Google has named these as specific things, you can really use each list for whatever works for you best. One thing I can attest to is that as you start to add more and more things to your lists, your map can look a bit overwhelming when it's covered with pins. So thankfully, you can hide or show any lists on your map. To access the save lists on the browser version of Google Maps, click on the 3-line menu icon near the search bar to open that side menu that you see here. So then you can click on your places, and then here you will see all of your lists. You may notice a fourth list called sunset shooting locations there. You can actually create your own list. Just be aware that they all share that same blue icon. Click on those 3 dots next to the list and you see the option to hide or show that list on your map. It's that simple. Accessing the saved list on your phone is a bit easier. You just have to click on the saved icon at the bottom and then make sure you are on the list tab. Now, a few things to consider while planning and researching are seasons, temperature, and weather. For seasons, bear in mind that the same location might have 4 completely different shooting scenarios depending on that season. Fall and spring can be tricky to predict. One year they might arrive early, another they might arrive late. Summer and winter have their own unique challenges, particularly in terms of weather. For temperature and weather, don't assume that your experience with a particular, temperature or weather situation is universal. For example, 85 degrees in Portland in July is going to feel very different than 85 degrees in somewhere like Tokyo. Dry heat feels very different than humid heat. I can even say this from living in Texas. If I go to Houston, it is a lot different than when I'm in the middle, somewhere like Austin, or even a little bit more north in Dallas. Another thing to bear in mind with weather is that rain and snow fall very differently in different places. Before I had moved, I had always heard that it was, very rainy on the West Coast, right? So imagine my surprise that, somewhere in Seattle actually has a very similar amount of rainfall to Miami. The trick is that rain kind of falls very differently in both places. So you can kind of coexist with the rain on the Northwest pretty easily and still take photos even when it's raining, because it's usually, a slight drizzle at most. But, somewhere in Florida, where once the rain starts pouring, you just stop doing everything for like an hour or 2, and you wait for it to pass because it tends to come down as a torrential downpour. Timing is very important for sunrise and sunset photography, right? The early bird gets that sunrise worm. I know you might be on vacation and you might want to relax, but that won't get you that sunrise photo. Also bear in mind that you are not the only one with the perfect shot idea for sunset and sunrise photos. It's a good idea to show up extra early, claim a spot, sometimes even a couple hours early. Even if you have a loose schedule, which tends to be how I operate when I travel, try to base your day around sunrise and sunset plans. And this is when doing your research before the trip really comes handy. Thankfully, we have apps and websites to help us with our sun planning. First up is on the left here, TPE provides you with a visual way to plan the natural light of the sun for your outdoor photography. This is a great way to dip your toes in sun planning, as it lets you set a specific point and you can see where the sun will be in relation to the point at any given time. While the smartphone app is paid, you can access the web version for free. The other app I suggest is PhotoPills. They don't have a website version, and the app costs a little bit more than TPE, but overall, you get a better value with all the tools in PhotoPills. One of the biggest advantages is the augmented reality feature, where you can see an example of that here on the right. And it lets you very accurately plan for where the sun will be in your shot at any given time. There are two big questions I always advise setting an answer to before you leave on your trip. First is when to post. There are two main approaches here. You can take your photos, edit them as you go on your trip, and the goal here is to share your travel story in real time. And two is to take photos and worry about editing and storytelling aspect after your trip is done. For me, I usually have a mix of the two. I do some light posting as I go to keep my audience engaged, and then I'll do some full posting after the trip. Regardless of which approach you take, it's very important to figure this out before your trip. If not, you'll end up going back and forth and adding unnecessary stress to your travel. The other important question is whether you should photograph or enjoy. Now, if you're going on a solo trip or a dedicated photography trip, this is a lot simpler. You're able to have a more efficient travel and photography setup, and the enjoyment can just be the photography itself. If you're going on vacation with, family, friends, it's a little different. That situation tends to make it harder to get into photography mode, and you always risk, maybe upsetting the travel team. One thing that can greatly help with that vacation scenario is to have set hours that are photography hours that you spend apart from the team. It could be a whole dedicated photography day. I know someone who wakes up and goes to bed early while their partner wakes up and goes to bed late. So this presents a perfect situation for them as he's able to get up early, do his travel photography thing while his partner's still sleeping. Another thing I suggest is getting your travel buddy a camera. This worked out for me very well, where I got my partner an RX-10. And while they had never considered themselves a photography ever before, they love to take the time to capture the world as we travel. That helps me be able to let go and get into that full photographer mode while we're traveling. Again, I want to stress that it's very important to do this before the trip. Make sure everyone knows the rules and what's going to happen. So you've done your research, you packed all your gear, you've gotten your travel partner a camera to distract themselves with. All that's left is to actually go on your trip and take some photos. We're going to start with some safety tips while traveling, and then I've got a whole bunch of travel photo tips for you. And some of each type of photography that I'm shooting in relation to location. In terms of safety, all of the usual travel safety rules apply, but there are some that are even more important while traveling with camera gear. First is don't leave anything in your car. If you got to rent a car, plan to never leave any gear inside your car, even if it's for just a few moments. I've heard so many horror stories from photographers visiting famous spots, and having their car broken into and gear stolen when they were gone from the car for less than 5 minutes. And the nondescript photographer, don't look like a tourist. Don't look like a fancy photographer. I mean, play the part. Keep a record of your gear. Create a digital list with models, serial numbers, and even photos of the gear laid out that you're traveling with your luggage. Now, all eyes on all gear at all times. It's easy to feel comfortable and leave a camera out on a table during a meal or next to you on a bench, but you should never let go of your gear. If you sit to eat, leave the camera in the bag on the floor and put your leg through the strap so no one can take it. And be respectful. This one is really easy to cross accidentally. Make sure to just research local customs before you go on your trip to avoid any conflict. So now, for some photography tips to help improve your travel life in different situations. First up here's cityscapes. With cityscapes, I tend to use a telephoto lens. I know a lot of the time we get wrapped up in that wide angle. And when it comes to, cities and buildings, being able to capture a lot of the scene, but a lot of great cityscape shots are actually taken further away with a telephoto lens, and seek out bodies of water. So this is definitely easier in some cities than others, but including a body of water in the foreground can help kind of spice up that city shot, right? Especially if you can't get a nice reflection in there. Beware of haze. Just because it's a bright sunny day doesn't mean there isn't haze affecting your view of the buildings. This is especially true for shots taken from further away. If you can't come back at another time, this is when something like a circular polarizer can help to some degree, as well as even some post-production functions like dehaze in Lightroom. Keep your line straight. There's always a time and a place for breaking the rules. And if you look at the image I took here, you can see I definitely broke that rule. But if you aren't going for an epic low to the ground shot like this, try to keep your vertical line straight as much as possible. And this will give your cityscape images a more balanced feel to them. So the natural progression from those cityscapes into architectural photography, certain cities really lend themselves to this, right? New York, Paris are just two that come to mind. Imperfect lighting can be different at different times of days. So especially when it comes to interiors with windows, you might find that you need to revisit a spot later on or on a different day in order to capture the best lighting. Explore details as much as the whole. I find that people sometimes get wrapped up in the whole scene instead of looking for the little details that can equally contribute to the feel of that institution. So go in, take a few wide shots, and then spend some time in looking for smaller pieces of the building to puzzle and feature into the image. Look for unique angles, right? While cityscapes usually call for straight verticals, architectural photography can often benefit from bending the lines. Take example, this image using an ultra wide angle lens aimed up, which created that favorable distortion in the image that emphasized those unique shapes. And don't be afraid to include people. There's probably not a lot of room for people in the true sense of architectural photography, but when it comes to travel photography, the human element is an important one. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few more slides, but for now, just remember to work some people into your architecture shots. Now, street photography, definitely more of the traditional sense, but don't rely on shallow depth of field here. I love shooting at 1.8, 2.8 as much as the next person, but with street photography, a lot of the time you're looking for fleeting moments and you can't afford to miss a shot, even with great autofocus. And the other thing to consider is that it's called street photography. If you can't see the street because it's blurred, you've missed the point. Being conspicuous in manner. This falls under the make your subjects as comfortable as possible rule. This isn't the time for, political t-shirts or be yelling at your group, or keep it cool, keep it calm, keep it collected. And, smile, right? This continues with the make your subjects comfortable rule. Smile, be nice. No need to force a creepy smile. I'm one of those people that, hates faking the smile because I don't think it's genuine, but you just need to put off a positive vibe and people will be likely and even more responsive to you. Frame and wait. So, street photography is often a waiting game. If you find a great composition, just hang out, wait for some interesting activity to cross the frame before capturing your image. Then there's landscape photography. It's one of my favorites, particularly since I tend to favor more natural settings than urban ones when I'm traveling. And even if you do bring your tripod, you can feel compelled to bring with you every day. You can easily stick to the days where you plan to do landscape photography. But that's, we should be using our tripod here. And again, I mentioned foreground before, but one of the biggest mistakes I see photographers make, even with landscape photography, is to not include an interesting foreground element, especially when you're photographing, a wide scene from far away. That epic lake in front usually won't count as an interesting foreground element, unfortunately. That is, unless you happen to have a really sweet reflection that happens, like in this image. And this is also the time for RAW. I've seen a lot of photographers shift to shooting JPEG, and I totally get it. The JPEG quality, especially from the Sony cameras, is pretty incredible. I mean, some folks like to reduce their editing workflow, and so that said, landscape photography is the one time you should actually make an exception to this and shoot RAW. It's going to give you a lot more exposure latitude when you edit, so you can bring out those shadows, those highlights, without having to bracket. And again, I talk about filters before, but filter a day keeps the Photoshop away, right? I try to keep my post-production workflow as light as possible, even when I'm shooting RAW. A circular polarizer works wonders on skies and reflections, and can help bring an added pop to your colors. If it's hazy out, it can help a bit with that as well. Now, you can't get to landscape photography without getting your hands dirty in some nature. Don't disrupt nature. This is the same with photographing people while you travel. You want to cause as little disruption to where you visit as possible. Don't get close to that really cute baby deer. Don't walk over a sensitive habitat to get a shot. Natural light is your friend. I try to use natural light as much as possible in all situations, but nature definitely takes this to a different level. You're welcome to bring a small reflector if you want to illuminate some of the front of the backlit subject in nature, but leave your lighting at home. Seek out water reflections. So just like with cityscapes, having water in your nature shots will help give an interesting edge, particularly if you can find good reflections to include. And use nature to frame, right? You'll quickly discover that forests can be a nightmare to properly capture the scale of something. There are trees and branches everywhere, and taking a wide shot usually becomes very visually distracting. On the flip side, you have the option of turning some of that visual noise, in this case, things like branches and leaves, into a unique frame around the subject. After you're back from your nature adventure, you'll have worked up quite an appetite, and what a better way to chronicle your trip than to showcase some of the great food that you've eaten. Here I keep my depth of field under supervision. So I know it might be tempting to bust out the 2.8, the 1.8 aperture, but beware, while that might help in a lower light situation, you still run the risk of blurring part of the subject or the food or the plate itself. So using a table setting creatively, I've seen many photographers clear off the entire table in order to take a nice photo of one dish. And while I agree that what's on the table can be distracting, you can also arrange it in a way that adds to the photo. The idea here is to share your experience, not just showcase one random dish. If I see a plate of spaghetti surrounded by nothing, that's not really it's not really selling that travel experience to me. And use accent lighting. Lighting inside restaurants is usually not suited for photography. If you have a small accent light, you can use that, or you could just bust out the flashlight on your phone to help light up some of those darker spots. A lot of times I'll ask to sit near a window or outside. Nothing better than natural light for food photography. And it never hurts to ask if you can, sit closer to the window. And that worked out in this favor as I was seated near the window instead of that darker back room area. So after your long day, you're taking photos through the city, streets, landscapes, nature, your food, you will always come back to night. At night, cities come along with a new vibe and a whole new style of shooting. So keep it steady. If you've got your tripod with you, don't be scared to take it out at night. If you don't, using a camera with in-body stabilization will help keep your longer shutter speeds, exposures nice and sharp. You can always find a wall or something to lean on for added stability. ISO, go as low as you can. Don't be afraid to push it if you need. Even with the huge improvements in low light or high ISO performance on these alpha cameras, I find a lot of people still like to stick to ISOs under 3200. If you got a full frame, you should start bumping that ISO to, above that 6400 and keep going from there. I mean, practice this and you find the number that you're comfortable with. Again, just like with landscapes, even if you're shooting exclusively JPEGs, I suggest using raw files for the night shots. That will give you more room to room to breathe. It's more lenient, more tolerant, especially when bringing out darker areas of the image. And now tonal contrast versus dynamic range. Now, I find that 9 times out of 10, it's better to have an image that showcases the natural contrast of a night scene with extreme lights and darks. Then try to capture an entire scene with extended dynamic range. Here's a great example on this image. I could have done a series of bracketed shots or HDR and then edited all the dark spots in the photo to be brighter, but that's not how it looked, especially then at night. Part of what makes nighttime unique is the extreme tonal contrast you see, where spots under a light are very bright and everything else is very dark. And so, a lot of information to kind of take in there. And after our trip, I'm sure you're exhausted. So lucky for you, our last section right now is going to be after your trip. You likely already have some editing software that you use for your photography, but if you're just getting started the most common ones are Lightroom and Photoshop from Adobe. Lightroom tends to be the most popular as it gives you a lot of flexibility in an easy to use interface. Photoshop is good when you need to really push your images beyond what Lightroom can do. I generally say Lightroom is great for batch editing, whereas Photoshop is great for manipulation altogether. Another popular editing suite is Sony's Imaging Edge Desktop. This is actually a free suite of programs for Mac or PC that has 3 components. You have the remote idea, which lets you use your computer as a live view remote for your camera. So think about our app now brought to you via software for the computers. Then you have Viewer, which acts like a library where you can see all of your raw files. And even within Viewer, you can apply batch edits. And then that lends me to the final part of Imaging Edge Edit, which lets you edit those images similar to what you can do with Adobe. And if none of these work for you, there are also other third-party editing apps out there. Another thing I suggest is, naming, file naming, folder structuring. And this really just helps keep track of my photos or keeps them all organized, especially as you go on more and more trips often. Even if you already have something set up for the other types of photography that you want to do, travel photography presents a unique challenge because all of the locations involved in all of the different types of photography. If you have a unique organization scheme, it will help you easily find things later on, as opposed to just throwing everything in one main folder. The goal here is to keep it simple. We're not trying to create an endless list of subfolders within folders, but we're just something to help keep your main trips separate. For me, that means one main folder for each year, and then within that one folder per state that I'm traveling, and then or one folder per country if I'm traveling internationally. But this works really well for the original files, particularly if you're using Lightroom, because you can go a bit deeper with keywords, which we'll also talk about. And if you want to go a little deeper with that organization, adding keywords to your photos in Lightroom. For now, we're just going to talk about locations, but you can create a keyword for just about anything. Some people like to have genre keywords like landscape, portrait, food, while others like to list actual subjects like a tree, a lake, or a building. In terms of locations, I try to keep the keywords simple, just like my folder in my file names. I have a separate main keyword for international or domestic photos. And as you can see, I then have a separate keyword for each country. And under that, I even have a keyword for each city that I've taken photos in. For areas like Mount Hood, where listing the cities that spots technically fall under might not be useful, I'll just use location names like Mirror Lake or Trillium Lake. And you don't have to follow, this exact scheme, but it's good to have some plan in place before you start editing. And remember, just keep it simple. And at this, when I started the class, I talked about how the best way to look at travel photography is through the concept of storytelling, where storytelling is more on the intermediate advanced side of that travel photography in itself. We mainly focused on the more technical aspects here, but I have a few tips to keep in mind with storytelling, particularly with regarding sharing your photos on social media. Again, your goal should be to tell a story, but more importantly, a powerful one. With social media, the goal is engagement. By keeping your story powerful, it becomes more impactful and through that, more engaging. I'm sure a lot of you remember the days of having to sit through slideshows of family vacations and what a drag that was, right? Having friends post 400 photos in a Facebook album makes you rethink even worth clicking on it. And no one wants to sit through and look through large amounts of travel content. This is one of the hardest things for me because I really want to just take every photo and walk someone through my entire experience. But to quote a great meme, ain't nobody got time for that. You've heard me say it already, but I'll say it again. Keep it simple.
All right. Excellent. I'm going to put one thing in the chat here real quick. Somebody asked a question about filters. I'm going to make sure that that information is in there for everybody. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat here so we can get to that. I have a few already. I do want to let people know, I think there were some that came in a little bit later. This is being recorded, so as soon as the live stream's over, you are able to go to the same link at the same spot here on YouTube and watch this again as many times as you want. So feel free to do that and fill in your notes that you may have missed. And I had somebody asking about circular polarizers, so I'm going to put that link in there if you wanted to get a circular polarizer from the Bedford website. Okay, now I have a few questions here. First one is, someone was asking, how do you market travel photography or travel photos? Like if you wanted to, make some money off of these.
I don't know. Everyone's talking about NFTs, right? I think that's the future right now. But I'm not really marketing anything. I mean, I'm mostly just using these for personal use, or they might become an image for someone later. But for the most part, professionally, I'm not selling my images, at least my travel images.
Yeah, I understand that. I also had somebody asking about the food photography, specifically regarding food photography. Do you use flash or a wider aperture?
Like I said, I mean, you can go into the wider apertures. Just bear in mind that for your focus. So I'll say if you have a small little LED light, even so, not even just like a flash, so that way you're not interrupting those around you. So something like a small LED light works as well. I kind of noted that you can even use like your cell phone light, for example, to kind of light up a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and even then, especially if you're in a like a public dining area, you don't want to attract too much attention, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
I had someone asking about, we're asking if you would explain the de-lighting function on the camera, and then there's another question after that.
De-lighting?
That's what the person said. De-lighting concepts. I'm wondering if it was like the dynamic range optimizer. Pablo, if you're asking about that, I didn't know if that's what you were mentioning, because I know there's a DRO, the dynamic range optimizer, built into the Sony cameras. I was wondering if maybe you could explain what that is to folks.
Yeah, I mean, we have the DRO setting. I think de-lighting was a term that Nikon used originally, but in all, it's probably all relative. But DRO, or dynamic range optimizer, is basically in-camera processing for recovering shadows. And we kind of talked about this a little bit in the last webinar, but it will apply to the JPEG only, whereas it's processing or raising those shadows in camera. So you take an image and you have different levels of DRO, 1 through 5. So that's just how much, basically play with those settings and you'll see that effect. It's just you're adding more to that as you increase that number. So I'll tend to say within digital, exposed for the highlights in the shadows are recoverable. So those recoverable shadows are done either in camera, or if you're shooting in with DRO, or if you're shooting in RAW, it'll be done in post.
Yeah, absolutely. And then a second part of that question was saying, what are the advantages and disadvantages of noise control, or the noise reduction inside the camera? When to use that, when not to use that?
Yeah, I would say, okay, maybe I've seen in some, what do I want to say? Landscape astro work, right? Where the camera might actually pull out some, we always talked about star eating, right? So this might be a case where ISO noise reduction will actually remove some stars, right, from the images, because it's thinking that it is digital noise. So that's primarily when I'm shutting that off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also recommend making sure you're in the current firmware for whatever camera you're using, because I know that has been somewhat of an issue for certain photographers, and that has been addressed in firmware. So make sure you're keeping, you're checking the Sony website periodically for updates like that, because that could be beneficial to you. I had a few other really good ones here in the chat. Karen was asking, after your trip, do you create folders on the SD card while traveling? I guess for before you go into the computer, do you put them in separate folders? Do you compartmentalize those in the card? I'm not sure how Sony writes that information.
Yeah, you can.
That way you can remember where the locations are, or remember, I guess, different time periods that you were shooting.
Yeah, you can definitely be proactive and set up folders within the SD card, or multiple folders, and you could even apply file naming structures, so that way if you are in a certain area of the day, you can at least start the file off with that location name or acronym for whatever, to separate it from other times. So, and that's very quickly accessible in the menu to change. It all depends if I think about it preemptively or not. So yes and no. I've been organizing digital work for well over a decade, that I don't really need to go into that level of organization in camera, because I'll just do it in the end anyway. But you can, it definitely makes the workflow a lot easier. That's the
Yeah.
thing with the alpha cameras, is like no compromises, right? Like you can basically do anything.
Mm-hmm. So are you saying in the thumbnail view, you can kind of figure out, okay, that was the end of that day, or that was the end of that shoot. We did something and then I came back and I can clearly see that this was when we started doing this other event.
That's right.
Excellent. And then I had somebody, this is a question that's asked pretty often about when we're talking about landscape or street photography. And I think this is something worth talking about every time, because I think it's important to talk about being respectful and not being confrontational. Leslie was saying in street photography, when you're taking photos of people, how do we take permission? Like what are the legal grounds for taking photos of people, especially in a public place?
Okay, well, I'll generally say if you're in the public area, you can have your image taken regardless if you ask or not. And again, I just go by to being like discreet, don't be so what do I want to say here, like obvious, right? So I'll tend to maybe even walk around for a little bit, or walk around my subject that I feel like I want to photograph. If it's like blatantly I'm photographing a person, you can approach, I mean, you can ask permission, and it all comes down to your morals, I guess, beliefs, right? Like I truly feel like growing up in a city like Boston, Massachusetts, I'm always in a public space and I can photograph anything at any time because I'm in public, like, you know what I mean? But when it starts to become like private property, that's when it becomes a bit different.
Yeah, and I think even in terms of keeping it civil, I know some people who keep business cards with them. So if there's one or two people that you find interesting and you want to take their photo, you can kind of approach them and say, hey, do you mind if I photograph you? I'll let you have the image, or I'll let you see the image on my website, just so that way they're aware and they know where it's being used. I know some people have done that before. So it's there are some fine lines.
Right.
So let me see. I'm not seeing many other questions than that, other than maybe what would be a good camera for beginners? That was really one of the last. Oh, Pablo had another question. Go ahead and answer that one. What's a good camera to start out with?
Oh, I mean, the best camera is going to be the one that's with you. Whether it is even something like the smaller point and shoot series, like the RX 100 series, that's a great way to get started into the whole Sony system. Because again, it really shares a lot of that same menu idea. Virtually, it's the same menu as the interchangeable lens cameras. So, starting in RX series is great. You could go get ready for the interchangeable lens idea, start with the APS-C cameras, or you can just, go for what we strive to go for, which is full frame, and start there. Because if we start at the top, and I'm not saying top of the line, but, in terms of sensor size, we could really just make that lens investment for that camera. I'll always tend to say you marry your lenses, you date your bodies. So, the bodies are always changing, but rarely do lenses ever get updates, or just like frequent updates. Yeah, we'll see one or two versions of a certain model, but all in all, again, it's one ecosystem, it's one mount ecosystem. So make that lens investment and just pair it with whatever camera that you want to work with.
Yes. Keyword investment on those full frame lenses. That carry through, and definitely in my experience, the A7C is an excellent full frame to start off with, because it's small. And we do have a deal on the A7 III camera. There's a bundle we have going on the website at bedfords.com. So if you're interested in going to the full frame line, that's an excellent place to start. Here's the other question that Pablo had. He was following up on we were talking about street photography and photographing people. Let's see if there are specific shots of people that end up being used for income. Will a model release be necessary?
I guess it goes right back to that whole public scenario. If you were in a public space, you don't have that right to that image, right? I mean, it all comes, there's a lot of specifics there, I guess. But again, I'm not selling my travel works or my street photography work anyway. So I never really crossed that path.
Right. And I have some friends that have done some commercial work. Granted, they went out intending it to be commercial work. So they had hired talent, but they still had to sign a model release. So I think it can be a little bit different when you're out in a public area with strangers. So it's something I would definitely speak to a legal professional about. So let's see. Is there a way to attach an external flash like a bounce flash to a Sony Cyber Shot?
Not so much. I mean, the only thing that I can think of doing is using a flash that can read an optical signal. So that way, if the point and shoot flash goes off, that it sends that signal, the other flash off camera will see that flash and fire simultaneously, because the speed of light is going to be just blazingly fast.
Mm-hmm.
There won't be a delay is what I mean there.
Right. And then Randy has a question. What's your opinion on tagging photos with GPS info in the metadata? Do you do that very often?
You can do that with the location link setting. Again, within Imaging Edge Mobile, can you use Bluetooth with the alpha cameras to basically fetch the GPS from your phone, and then apply that to the image. Again, it comes down to if I'm preemptively thinking about doing that. That's what it comes down to. And also, how much battery life do I have on my phone?
Mm-hmm. And then Ron was asking if someone's looking to transition from a 5D. Ron, real quick, are you using like a 5D3 or 5D4? So if someone's looking to go from a Canon 5D to a Sony, what body would you suggest to get the same, if not better, features?
Any Sony?
Just transitioning from Canon to Sony.
Oh, I'm just saying any Sony will be better. I'm making a joke. Obviously, stay within full frame. You want to kind of compare an apple to an apple. So staying within full frame. I mean, if resolution is primarily the factor, look at a resolution model, any of the A7R series cameras. But if it's something like speed that you need, we have specific line of cameras for the speed application. And I mean, like, not so much just 20 frames a second or 30 frames per second, but how focus acquisition and how well does that work? Cameras like Alpha 9 and even Alpha 1 are the fastest focusing cameras that we produce, in the idea that they calculate several times a second. They're literally talking back and forth to the lens 60 or 120 times a second. So that's a blazingly fast communication to keep persistent autofocus, right? So it all comes down to subject matter, what you want out of the camera, like resolution. I guess if it is any kind of the 5D cameras, you're maxing out at 31. So even an A7R3 has 42 megapixels. So that would be better. You could even look at, brand new A7 IV camera is basically going to boast a lot of that autofocus speed with high resolution, 33 megapixels. And that was the idea with Alpha 1 was, increased resolution with speed. But, I'm not saying buy a $6,000 camera or $6,500 camera, something like a A7 IV, $24.99. I mean, it's such a good price point.
Yeah, exactly. Ron said he's using a 5D Mark III. So, I mean, you're looking at that's 23 megapixels. So
you could look at an A7 III and still get better and still get, an improved performance. And really just, it's because it's within mirrorless, we have that improved autofocus performance, but we have that improved. We can shoot 10 frames a second on a camera like that still. We can have WYSIWYG, right? What you see is what you get. So as I'm changing my exposure, whatever I'm seeing on that LCD or that viewfinder is the image that I'm going to capture.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ron, I mean, honestly, even going with the A7R3 or R4, you're going to get even a few more frames per second if you're shooting faster, but it's going to be a significant megapixel boost. So if that's, if that's part of your workflow where you need to crop in more or you're blowing them up larger, I mean, those are two excellent options. And Leslie, I'm a little confused on the question. The A7R3 for travel best. I'm not, Leslie, if you could rephrase that question. I'm sorry, I'm just a little confused on it. But I mean, the A7R series is an excellent series. Tons of resolution, especially if you're doing landscape like we're talking about today. Landscape and travel. Thanks, Pablo. We appreciate you. Pablo's given us some kudos, so I definitely put that toward you, Joshua. That's a lot more you than me.
Thank you, Pablo.
Yeah, Leslie was asking, is the A7R3, is that best for travel, I guess, compared to maybe like the just the A7 series?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, within the A7 series, they're all going to pretty much share the same body style. They're all shaped the same. They're all identical. It's really the sensors that are different. And, I know some people to prefer a lower resolution, high resolution camera, right? R3 versus R4. I know some users to prefer an R3 just to have, they tend to think that the 40-ish megapixel sensor is actually very perfect versus 61 megapixels. Because again, I go back to, with great power comes great responsibility, but with higher resolution comes more information. And so I'm turning a 80 megabit file now to 120 megabit file, and so increased storage capacity or increased hard drive space. Also comes with computers upgrades, right? So if I am, wanting to process a lot of high resolution images, but maybe my 3-year-old computer can't really take all that, you know what I mean? So you just have to understand that when going with higher resolution, it often comes with needing to, maybe get an upgrades to the computer's end, or, it all comes down to your workflow.
Absolutely. It definitely comes down to workflow and how you're going to use the camera. These are tools first and foremost, so get the right tool for the right job. So I have 2 other questions here. I think we'll probably wrap it up after these 2. David was asking, how do the lenses and the in-body image stabilization, how do those interact with each other? How do they combine to give you, ridiculous amounts of stabilization?
Yeah, they work in tandem with each other. I mean, like I said, in-body stabilization, something like 4 to 5.5 stops. And so with the lens, you're just getting more than that, and so they're going to work in tandem with each other. For handheld shooting, that's primarily where it comes down to. So you can literally handhold 1/10 of a second as if it was something like 1/250th of a second, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Susan was asking, she says she has a Sony RX10 Mark II. How much better would my images be if I upgraded to a full frame?
Increased sensor size obviously is going to, play a huge factor here. With full frame versus 1-inch sensor, I mean, letting in more light onto the sensor just means cleaner ISOs, or low light performance is definitely a lot better. And I mean, just comparatively, because full frame, you got to imagine there's more than 4 1-inch sensors that you can squeeze into a full frame sensor in terms of surface area. But then you also got to imagine that now you need lenses to conform to the full frame sensor. So, a camera like an RX10, which is I believe that one was the 24 to 200 millimeter lens, or 24 to 240. That one is, nice for a 24 to 200 in such a small form factor. But when you look at a 24 to 240 for full frame with the camera, it will increase size too. The actual form factor.
Definitely. I know you're going from a built-on lens to flexibility of choosing what lens you want to put on. Some people that's a hassle, but you do get much more flexibility with that choice.
That's right.
Excellent. Well, that's all we have for this class. Looks like we had a lot of good questions. Again, plenty of good deals on Sony equipment this week. Bedford, use the Bedford tax coupon code if you're buying anything on our website. We're also doing sales. Bedford's paying the sales tax on Sony and ProMaster equipment in the stores as well. If you want to see Joshua tomorrow, if you happen to be near the Oklahoma City area, he's going to be there from about 10 to 4 or so. So bring your questions and and plenty of questions and maybe even some positive comments. He'd love to have those. No, but he's going to be there to help you out, and especially if you're looking at switching over to another system, into the Sony system. This is an excellent opportunity if you are nearby. Joshua, do you have any closing remarks for us?
I just want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in. Tyler, thank you for moderating for both of these webinars. And again, I will be in Oklahoma tomorrow, and then looking into the new year, definitely come find me at all the Bedford locations, because I'll be doing my tours.
Yeah, absolutely. And feel free to like and subscribe. Subscribe to us here on YouTube. We are going to have other live streams, and we have other pre-recorded content. So we'd love to help you in any way that we can, whether it's here on YouTube or there in the stores, online, at Facebook, things like that. We're glad to help you out in any way that we can. So yeah, we'd love to see you on the next one, and we'll see everybody later.
Thank you all.